Despite being the world's largest music streaming platform, Spotify has never made a single dime in profit so far. It must look to expand beyond music streaming, with podcasts being one of the key drivers.
They're literally pulling for whatever they can to survive. Think if they're going broke.
DIY.
DIYers, as you know, I have been going hard in the paint when it comes to Spotify and all of these new threshold rules and things that they're trying to put in place. However, in this space of information, I think it's always important to keep yourself updated and also learn more details that maybe you weren't privy to. There's a few details that came to mind after I had a sit down with the legend in the make, LaRussell from Vallejo. At this portion of the interview with LaRussell, I told him about my decision to leave streaming. Look at his reaction.
You know what I did 2 days ago? Delete all my music off of streaming. And I'm not gonna blame you for that. I'm a grown man, I make my own situations, but I deleted my music off because, let me tell you,
That was his first initial reaction. Here's where he gave me a gem that anybody with an open mind that is actually searching for answers, you're going to always open your mind, especially when somebody's making as much sense as he is. Here's what he had to say further along in the conversation about Spotify and its new threshold.
I think that those conditions that they're setting, I don't believe it's unreasonable. I think it encourages people to make better product, to get more support. Like you're only worried about that type of shit when you're having to be worried about that type of shit. It's like, bro, if people are supporting you and streaming your music, you're going to be making your money. If you only got 2 streams that month, you worry about the wrong fucking shit anyway. Nigga, them little 1.1 cent, you are worried, your focus is in the wrong place.
Right, I hear you.
Get your shit popping and amplified to where you don't have to think about a crumb because you're getting a whole load. We don't have to fight over that shit. The DSPs came in and gave us all an extra income, and niggas is complaining. It's an extra income. They built the infrastructure. None of us built it. We just get paid off of it. So until you want to build a new infrastructure like a whole, but if you want to keep enjoying and reaping the benefits of the infrastructure that they built with their heart, soul, energy, and their entire life, then you have to respect whatever precedent and rules they set. When you come to my house, there's certain ish that I'm going to allow at my house because this is my ish, and that's anywhere else you go until you build your own crib. My niggas get splits. So it's like, I used to get $0 when I put a song online. Now when I put that same song online, I get paid to do it.
So the only business that matters is not just our own. It is also the business of the streaming platforms. Obviously want to turn a profit because it is still a business, but they also provide a service that we have a choice of whether or not to use. I understand what his point was, and as I started to ask more questions, I started to see why there was a level of empathy for the companies that maybe at that moment I didn't have because I was thinking about their threshold.
Everyone will always be in conflict with the numbers. No one's ever going to feel like they're getting paid enough for their art. How could you? But when you start like arguing over the crumbs, I just feel like it changes where our alignment should be in terms of why we do this shit and what we're doing. It's like most of us who really do music, who really care, we wasn't getting no money. You feel me? Like,
he's not lying.
Somebody gonna have to tell the truth, and I'm gonna tell it.
We adjust our businesses as we go along, and we pivot because that is what a successful businessman or businesswoman must do. So he's making a lot of valid points in that. In the very beginning, I wouldn't say all of us, but many of us probably didn't anticipate a day that we would be making money off of this thing that just seemed like a cool thing to get into.
You love it and you go make great art and eventually you get paid. Niggas is trying to get paid before they make great art now.
Jeez,
you didn't even deliver.
The math on the back of the napkin, as they put it, was 22 streams a month. That's enough. My thing was, then why not institute that in the very beginning? YouTube even made it to where in the very beginning it was 10,000 subscribers, or 10,000 views and all of these things. You can just change at any point.
That wasn't always a YouTube practice. YouTube had to grow and develop as a company before they even got to the point where they could do monetization, and that was their practice. That was not always their practice. When niggas are building things, and I think that's where the dissolution come in. There's a lot of people who consume product, and then there's people who build product.
His point that he's making right now about Spotify still being a business that, as you'll hear, generates about $10 billion a year. They still have goals of their own that they want to accomplish. What I didn't understand were what some of those obstacles may be that are creating scenarios where they have to, or they feel that they have to, create a threshold to ensure that the environment stays stable. There was a lot of things that, admittedly so, I did not know about the structure of Spotify. The information in this video and where it ultimately led to of why Spotify has not been able to be a profitable business may be a familiar friend of yours.
Despite being the world's largest music streaming platform, Spotify has never made a single dime in profit so far. The company has never had a profitable year in its history, and over the years its losses has added up to over 4 billion euros. For a company that has not only disrupted the entire music industry, but also completely revolutionized the way we consume music, one would reasonably expect Spotify to be drowning in profits. However, the reality is that Spotify has never been able to turn a profit, making it the only software company that generates over 10 billion euros in revenue each year to consistently lose money.
What is 10 billion euros to dollars? That still looks like $10 billion to me.
In this video, we will analyze the core problem behind Spotify's persistent lack of profits and examine the company's recent efforts in turning the situation around. With Spotify's financials laid out for everyone to see, it's no secret that at the heart of the problem are the high royalty fees it has to pay others for streaming their music. For every dollar in revenue Spotify makes from streaming music, nearly 2/3 are paid to the rights holders of the music, leaving only one.
The rights holders reserve about 2/3 of the income coming in to Spotify, leaving about 1/3 for them to run business with.
Includes research and development, sales and marketing, general and administrative, as well as taxes to name a few. This is unsurprisingly not enough for Spotify to cover for all of these costs, let alone leaving a little extra for it to pocket as profits. So the real question we should be asking here isn't why Spotify is losing money, but rather why it pays right holders such a substantial portion of its revenue. Given that Spotify is the market leader in music streaming with a 30% market share, can't Spotify negotiate for lower royalty fees?
Fam, Spotify dominates 30% of the market. Generally in business, when you are occupying 30% of any market, you're him. Oh, it's Himothy. You're them. You're that. You are the standard. But to be the industry leader when it comes to music streaming and to be in such a predicament, it does make you scratch your head.
Unfortunately for Spotify, the answer is no. This is because the party that Spotify actually pays most of its royalties towards and therefore has to negotiate with is a powerful oligopoly within the music industry comprised of 3 companies: Universal Music Group, Sony Music Entertainment, and Warner Music Group.
Here we go again. Good old Universal Music Group. Anybody surprised? It's good old Universal Music Group. They are occupying 2/3 of the money that is brought in by the largest music streaming website,
Commonly known as the Big Three. Together, these 3 companies hold a 70% share of the music recording industry and a 60% share of the music publishing industry.
Not to keep stopping it, but this does draw my attention. I must be as loud as my criticism was of this brother's video as I am about the correction that I think he was getting at. If you recall, Arsonist had a video where he was talking about how
Universal Records, about 30 to 40% owner of Spotify. How can you call yourself an independent artist? You still giving money to Universal Records when your shit gets played on Spotify.
At the moment, when you Google that, with that line of thinking, nothing in terms of those results popped up. However, now we see a little bit more clarity. And I actually sent this to him and I told him, I said, I think I found what you was talking about, OG. 70% is owned by these 3 companies. They don't necessarily own Spotify, from what we understand on the general public, but they do have dibs on 70% of the income that is generated specifically on Spotify. Shit. Music producers, rappers, and singers, are you looking to get some constructive feedback on your newest music? Joining Critique My Beats is super easy. All you gotta do is reserve a pass to critiquemybeats.com. Click on book a slot and choose if you wanna get 1 beat review, 2 beat reviews on our live stream every Monday. Best beat and best song of the night is going to win a cash prize. Join us at critiquemybeats.com.
By helping artists with the promotion and marketing of their brand and music, these major record labels in return get to own the music produced by these artists, and it is therefore from them that Spotify licenses the right to stream most of the music its users listen to. Without these licenses, millions of songs would not be available for streaming on Spotify, which would result in its customers turning to any one of its competitors, such as Apple Music, Amazon Music, or YouTube Music, who all have licenses with the Big Three and are all priced the same as Spotify. The difference between having and not having any one of the Big Three's music library is literally life or death for Spotify, which therefore gives the Big Three significant leverage over Spotify and is the main reason why Spotify has to pay them nearly 70 cents of every dollar it makes.
Ooh, bruh. If every time you made $1, I took 70 cents off of that dollar, how much you think you have left? You might be trying to figure out a threshold system to try to fight some of this back. Dare I say I'm starting to feel a little bit bad for Spotify? They getting their pockets shook.
These days, whenever a song you'd like to listen to pops into your mind, you know you'll be able to find it very quickly by doing a simple search on whichever music streaming app you're using. With all the major streaming apps having access to virtually the entire world's music catalog, this is amazing for us consumers, since we can listen to all the music we like in one place, rather than having to use multiple apps for different songs. However, as a business, this is terrible for the music streaming companies that run them. Because when all the platforms offer the same content, the lack of product differentiation between them results in pricing becoming the main area they will need to compete on.
Sheesh. When you get in pocket check, and then on top of that, your competitors are able to offer subscriptions for the same price, and you have relatively the same product on every single one of them, it's a lot of things that end up, you would assume, canceling themselves out financially. I didn't recognize how much of a challenge it was for some of these streaming websites,
which consequently drives down their revenue and profit potential. The homogeneity of the music streaming industry, where everyone offers the same product and a price the same, means that the platforms are all likely to be unprofitable just like Spotify, or at best making only tiny amounts of profits. Although this cannot be verified since Apple, Google, and Amazon don't publicly publish the financials for the music streaming businesses, it is very likely to be the case, given that Jimmy Iovine, the person who used to run Apple Music, has previously said, and I quote, "The streaming services have a bad situation. There's no margins. They're not making any money."
Whew. Now, I've been very critical because my assumption from the outside is that that ad revenue that is being generated was enough to cover what their needs are. As LaRussell pointed out in the beginning of this, there are a lot of costs that we're not always privy to. There's a lot of overhead in any business, and a lot of people won't recognize that until you go into business of your own. When you have to start paying for the LLC, when you have to pay a tax for conducting a certain type of business or for holding a certain type of product. There are so many things that are unpredictable when you go into business of your own, especially if you have a brick or mortar location. It's just unpredictable.
But despite a lack of profits being an industry-wide phenomenon, Spotify is in a particularly precarious position due to a key difference in business models compared to its competitors. For tech giants like Apple, Google, and Amazon, their music streaming services can also act as a loss leader for them. So rather than trying to make money off of music streaming solely as a standalone product, they can also bundle music streaming with some of the other services they offer.
Valid point. Spotify is very different from the competition. They are one of the only platforms that is a standalone music streaming company. When you think about Apple Music, they don't need Apple Music in order to be a successful brand. Why? Because they have Apple Watches. They have iPhones. But they have all these different products that allows this to still be a lost lead, and that it just existing draws people's attention and refreshes their memory like, oh shit, it's almost like an ad. You know what? I need to go update my phone simply by being on the platform that showcases the logo on a regular basis. Same thing with Amazon. Amazon doesn't need Amazon Music. It's just a little sexy stream revenue. However, Spotify, ain't nobody buying those Spotify laptops. That makes it a challenge, ladies and gentlemen.
For instance, the Apple One bundle, which includes services like iCloud, Apple TV, and Apple Arcade all alongside Apple Music, is a prime example of this. By combining all these services into a bundle that costs only $16.95 per month in the US, it is $7 cheaper than having to purchase each of the services separately, creating a win-win situation where customers feel like they've gotten themselves a good deal, and Apple actually ends up making more money than if those customers had just purchased Apple Music on its own.
How do you compete with that if you're Spotify? Like, these are established brands that by themselves are very profitable, you would assume. If every one of these streaming platforms have the same price, offer the same music, people may be more likely to lean in towards an Apple Music because look at that bundle, especially if you're an Apple user.
The same logic applies to Google with its YouTube Premium bundle, which includes YouTube Music on top of ad-free viewing on YouTube, as well as its wide range of hardware devices, most notably the Google Pixel series. And for Amazon, it's the Amazon Prime bundle that combines Amazon Music with Prime Delivery, Prime Video, Prime Gaming, and Prime Reading all into one package.
How do you compete with that if you're Spotify? What do you have to offer? I'll pay your gas for the next week. Like, what do you have to offer as a bundle for that customer?
On the other hand, Spotify lacks its own products to bundle with music streaming and therefore has little options on how to monetize music streaming other than as a standalone product. While Spotify has previously collaborated with companies like Hulu, AT&T, and Samsung to offer bundled services, profits from such deals are shared, making them much less lucrative for Spotify. Thus, Spotify is in a unique situation where although music streaming is its main business, it isn't making any money off of it. One common misconception people less familiar with the industry tend to have is in thinking that Spotify is the Netflix of music streaming. Although the two companies do look similar on the surface, the slight difference in the type of content they stream and thus the industry they're in is the main reason why Spotify is a $30 billion cash-burning company, whereas Netflix is a hugely profitable $200 billion enterprise.
Whoa! Spotify is not the Netflix of the music streaming world. They're losing money by the billions. Shit.
When Netflix first launched their movie streaming business, it was actually in a similar position as Spotify today. Since Netflix solely relied on licensing content from TV and movie studios for streaming, the majority of Netflix's costs for its streaming business at the time were also in licensing fees. In 2012, Netflix's licensing fees as a proportion of its streaming revenues was 64%, similar to the 70% of revenue that Spotify pays out in royalties today.
What he's pointing to is that in 2012, Netflix was in a very similar position. Had these people that were licensing these movies to them dominating about 64% of their revenue, but they pivoted.
However, what changed everything for Netflix was the introduction of Netflix Originals, which started in 2013 with the release of the award-winning TV series House of Cards featuring Kevin Spacey. Netflix Originals are mostly content that Netflix directly owns, usually either by producing the content itself or via acquiring the rights to the content. Netflix does not need to license the content from other studios to stream them, which lowers licensing fees and improves its margins. The Netflix original library has since grown significantly over the years to now include many blockbuster TV shows such as Squid Game, Stranger Things, Ozark, and Black Mirror.
If Spotify had original content that was on the level of success that these TV shows were, day and night difference. They'd be telling Universal Music Group, but wait till you hear what these gangsters did, because Spotify attempted to do that.
For Spotify, owning the rights to the music it streams would be equivalent to having its own Netflix Originals, which would reduce the royalty fees it has to pay to record labels and likely lead to sizable profits. However, the problem for Spotify is that the record labels had preempted this move, and so they cleverly protected themselves early on by specifying terms in their licensing contracts with Spotify that prevented Spotify from owning content and competing with them.
These gangster-ass gangsters. You be talking about getting in this music industry and you gon' wait till they sign me. I'm gonna really change this game. Niggas ain't worried about you. They got the most doggish of doggish lawyers in the business because they saw what happened with Netflix and they said, Spotify, not only am I taking 70% of your profit, your revenue, I also am going to put it in the terms. If you want to keep this license open and have access to these artists, because if you don't have it, it'll level your business, sign this. You will not be allowed to compete in any shape or form our primary business, which are artists, which is probably why you don't have a Spotify Records.
This makes it extremely difficult for Spotify to own content without breaking the terms of their contracts with their record labels, which may result in heavy penalties or even having legal actions taken against them.
Now, Spotify, if you want to keep your money good and keep your partners, they're not partners, them niggas is thugs. If you want to keep them happy and not have them punk you for your lunch money, you probably want to prioritize their artists on the front page of your playlist. That's why we've been saying that the playlists are jammed up. The shit's already predetermined, my friend. But you keep on paying for them Spotify playlists.
For Spotify to have any hopes of generating meaningful profits one day, it must look to expand beyond music streaming. This is why in 2019, Spotify announced its strategy of evolving from being a music streaming platform to becoming a platform for all audio content.
But do you know how terrified you have to be to completely jump away from even thinking about an original music scenario and then saying, you know what, guys, we've been thinking about this all wrong. Let's go to podcasting. You know, it's still voices and audio, right? Right? Hey, what's Joe Rogan's situation with his contract? Let's offer him some millions, 100 millions and all that. Hey, what's going on with Joe Budden? I don't know why we prefer so many Joes, but let's just go. Let's figure it out. It makes so much sense why they were so aggressive about this, because they're literally pulling for whatever they can to survive. Think if they're going broke.
With podcasts being one of the key drivers. The main logic behind this strategy is that the cost of streaming podcasts is much lower than the cost of streaming music. Within the podcasting space, Spotify will have moved away from territory controlled by the major music record labels, and
Scared.
is therefore able to negotiate much better licensing fees. Spotify claims that the long-term gross margin for podcasts is around 40 to 50%, which is much higher than the current 25 to 30% for music. So as Spotify's audience listens to more podcasts, the proportion of total revenue paid out in the form of music royalties decreases, resulting in higher margins for the company. It is with this idea in mind that led Spotify to aggressively push into podcasting, having invested over $1 billion to acquire several audio companies and strike exclusive podcasting deals with big-name celebrities to the likes of Joe Rogan, Kim Kardashian, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, and even the Obamas.
I gotta tip my hat. When they went big. And obviously with a company like Spotify, you should be able to do that. But to hedge your bets on this to the number of, I think he said $1 billion to pay out for podcasts like Joe Rogan's podcast, which is one of the most popular in the world. That's taking a hell of a chance. But I wonder how it worked out.
From a business perspective, a critical question regarding Spotify's podcasting strategy was whether podcasts would cannibalize its music business. If people simply switches from listening to music to listening to podcasts, Spotify's podcast revenue would only increase at the expense of its music revenue decreasing. In addition, if people spend less time on Spotify as a result of listening to podcasts, it might even lead to lower revenue and profits as a whole. The first half of 2023 has actually been even more unprofitable than the same period in 2022.
They shelled out $1 billion to get these exclusive deals with these podcasts. They saw an increase in the listening or the amount of time people spent, obviously because podcasts are much longer than songs. And after $1 billion, after having all those major names and all the news that went along with it, they still lost money.
Spotify will likely continue promoting the narrative of prioritizing growth in order to divert investors' attention away from the negative bottom line and buy time for the company to find better ways of monetizing its users. Though without any substantial changes leading to meaningful profits, it is only a matter of time before investors run out of patience and Spotify runs out of money, which may lead to a potential acquisition of the company by big tech.
If their investors start to get impatient, which I'm sure they already are, and they pull their money out, this leaves the opportunity for Spotify to get bought out by a huge tech company, or, dare I say it, one of those 3 major labels. I think that's been the plan the entire time. Bleed them until they can no longer conduct business anymore, and then buy them out when they're low. Then structure this so that it favors those 3 major labels. They can figure out something amongst themselves, and then they're able to pay whatever they want. Matter of fact, they'll be able to flip such a profit that they'll convince the artists that are a part of their labels that it's better that they're the owners of it, because now they're able to pay out more. So this is why I believe that Spotify is going broke.
We might continue to see Spotify doing things like layoffs or even raising prices, both of which we have witnessed recently in 2023. However, with wages representing only a tiny fraction of its total cost that's currently dominated by music royalty fees, layoffs alone will not have a significant impact on profitability, and Spotify can only raise prices when their competitors do so. This is why Spotify's recent price increase in July of 2023, its first price hike in over a decade, happened only after Apple, Amazon, and YouTube have all done the same thing.
Fam, what are they supposed to do? I feel bad for Spotify. You know, look, let me make my apology as loud as my criticism. I still think the threshold situation is fucked up, flat out. You look at this and you recognize that they don't even have the freedom to up their price, because how do you up your price and offer less compared to an Apple Music who says, I'll give you all these things for a bundle?
If record labels continue to gobble up 70% of Spotify's revenue, the solution to profitability is unlikely to be found within music streaming no matter what the company does. Spotify is a fascinating case that highlights how the dynamics between different industry stakeholders can affect a company's ability to generate profits. When suppliers have too much bargaining power and competitors offer homogeneous products, the resulting inability to reduce costs, combined with the lack of pricing power, can significantly impede any company's ability to turn a profit, even for a tech company as well known as Spotify, the market leader of one of the most popular consumer tech trends of its time.
I'm sorry, you know what this reminds me of? When I got my first placements, and everybody on the internet knew that I got these placements, and they were proud of me, they were retweeting the placements, but they didn't recognize I didn't get paid for the placement, at least not yet. And even when I did, I had accumulated so much debt that I was meeting fans of the placement that I got, and I knew for a fact that fan had more money in their pocket than I had in my pocket, because I ain't have shit. Can you imagine being seen as the industry leader, looking like you own your shit? You have someone in your pocket that accounts for 70% of the money that you're making. So even when you do good, you got somebody who's making more money off of you than you made off of the legwork you put in. Hey, Spotify is signed. Spotify is in a 360 deal. That shit is terrible. Hey, Spotify, dog, you know, look, when I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Shout out to LaRussell. When I am given new information, it is my responsibility to not hold on to my biases, but to dig a little deeper. This was one video away with multiple sources. Arsonist, I must also offer my apologies, my friend, from the heat makers. Some of the information might have got tangled. You were absolutely right. Better yet, how can we call ourselves independent and rely upon the income that we're getting from Spotify when Spotify doesn't even own the majority of Spotify when it comes to their revenue? They own it, of course, but they don't get the majority of their revenue. We are independent artists, quote unquote, signed to a Spotify who signed on the 360 deal to 3 major labels. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Does it make sense why I left music streaming? Is it making a little bit more sense? Because I have never felt as great as I did today, till today, about that decision. But DIYers, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours. DIYers, if you enjoyed this content, make sure that you hit the like button and maybe even consider subscribing. Come on, man. Don't get greedy. Peace.